Ask the Podcast Coach for March 4th, 2023.
Let's get ready to podcast.
There it is. It's that music that means it's Saturday morning. It's time. It is time. Yes, it's time for Ask the Podcast Coach, where you get your podcast questions answered live. I'm Dave Jackson from the School of Podcasting.com, and joining me right over there is the one and only Jim Collison from theaverageguy.tv. Jim, how's it going, buddy?
Greetings, Dave. Happy Saturday morning to you. We were sitting there chatting with each other, just having a good time. You're like, hey, we should probably get started.
Like, hey, it's 10:32. There are people out there waiting for us to
just having a good time together. That's the relationship Dave and I have, is we're just chatting, just having a good time, talking about podcasting.
But it is about that time. Are you ready for the? There it is. Everyone together. That's right. That awesome coffee pour is brought to you by our good friend Mark. And Mark who? Well, that is Mark DeCote over at podcastbranding.co. If you're watching the video, you can see all of his awesome artwork. There goes Podcast Radio Show. I know that show. Scrolling on by. Mark is an award-winning graphic artist, and he's also a podcaster, and I cannot stress enough how important that is if you've never worked with somebody who doesn't have a clue what a podcast is. And here's something you're not going to get from Fiverr. Mark is going to sit down with you and kind of listen to your show and figure out what is the vibe of your show, because you want your brand to reflect you and kind of what you're going for. I was listening to a member of the School of Podcasting yesterday, and she does a show for nutrition and primarily menopause. And boy, just when she got her music together, I was like, oh, I see the vibe you're going for. And you want your artwork to reflect the vibe of your show. You don't want it to be loud and obnoxious if you're all tame and stuff. So check out Mark over at podcastbranding.co. Take me home.
So delicious. Big thanks to our friend Dan Lefebvre, Based on a True Story Podcast, at basedonatruestorypodcast.com. I was out on his site checking it out, and his slogan, the podcast that compares Hollywood to history. So if you're looking for a pretty cool this week. This week they're covering, he's doing these short little miniseries things where he's covering 3 movies that happened this week in history: Waco, The Crucible, and Seabiscuit. So if you want to check that out, those are available. Episode 232. Dan, thanks for your sponsorship. Appreciate it. We'll be drinking the mug all day.
We haven't done one of these in a while, so.
And now it's time for a Power Rant.
I did this on YouTube this week. Please quit calling your YouTube channel a podcast. I know that, YouTube music.
It could be, though. I mean, it could, like, if
it could be, but
it could be a podcast.
Here's the solution. Because it's one thing to be a curmudgeon and go, if we can, we'd be Apple, right? Okay, got it. Just call it a show. It's a show.
Yeah.
If you call it a show, welcome to the show. You can say that on YouTube. You can say it in a podcast. You can say it in smoke signals, whatever you're doing, AM radio, whatever. But I just saw a guy that said, I'm doing a YouTube podcast. And I was like, it's not a YouTube podcast. It's a YouTube channel. Nothing wrong with that. Enjoy your content. Just quit confusing the audience. And
so what's going to happen when YouTube enables podcasting on their platform? And that is true.
Here's the thing that's fun. That is going to make things fun. Here's what I don't get. Number one, I found out this week I've had access to YouTube Music because I'm a YouTube premium person, and I've never used YouTube Music. And I guess one of the cool things about being a YouTube premium subscriber and having YouTube Music is it's ad-free. But when they add podcasts to it, they're going to put ads in it. From what I heard James Cridland say,
they're going to add ads to the feed themselves.
Somewhere over there while you listen, and this is the part that's all blurry, there are going to be ads over there somewhere. So my guess is they're going to pull a Stitcher Play and play ads in between episodes, maybe. That's how I would do it. If I was going to put ads on a platform, but just realize that I'm paying money for YouTube to get away from ads, and you're going to put them over here, and you're telling me to come over here and listen to podcasts.
Yeah, that's a bad move.
I'm like,
It's a bad
and
move.
then the other thing was James pointed out that it's only released in the U.S., And then I did some digging and found out that back in 2016, they did the exact same thing with Google Play Music. Everybody was like, ooh, podcasts are coming to Google Play Music. Yay. And then it was only in the US. And I'm like, I don't understand. I get it as a person that works in technology that you don't want to have an avalanche of people come in on a new product. But I'm like, you are kind of Google, right? You could probably beta test that somewhere. But to me, when you only do it in a certain area, I mean, the one thing that was here's a weird phrase you don't say a lot. The one thing that was cool about the pandemic is everybody was talking about it because everybody was going through it. Like people in Switzerland, we were all going through the same thing. And I'm like, why not let it go everywhere so everybody can be talking about how cool podcasting and YouTube music is? I'm like, that's the part I get that. And I did hear where, oops, wrong one. We'll come back to that. They're going to start implementing RSS. And that's the one that I went, they're going to somehow tie RSS into YouTube music. And then that's the part where everything gets blurry. And we're like, so does that mean they're going to start hosting files on YouTube music?
Yeah, you would think so. You would think so.
Yeah. So, because I know there's a thing about advertising. I was reading through the terms of service. I went over to Stitcher's portal, and Stitcher's portal is now Simplecast. And what's really weird about it is it almost looks like you're signing up for Simplecast. And I actually stopped because I went over and I was like, hey, none of my shows are here. And I emailed them and I'm like, do I need to add my shows back? And they're kind of like, yeah, even though they're already here. But by you signing up in the Simplecast portal, you'll now be able to see your stats that are here. The whole thing was very weird. But Dan has a point here. Doesn't everyone call Joe Rogan a podcast still, even though he's not? Yeah, that's true. He's technically not a podcast. Well, no, I guess not. If we go by the artist, he was a podcast. Yeah. And that's the part I don't want to die on that hill. But there's a guy in my Northeast Ohio podcasters meetup, and he goes live to Twitch on his phone. And I don't have the heart to go, you're not a podcast. You're a Twitcher or whatever, it's like you're a content creator. So that's cool. But,
well, why does it matter? Like this is the question I always ask. Why does that actually matter that we get so crazy about this definition?
It drives me nuts when somebody says, I have a podcast. It's called such and such. And I go to my favorite podcast app and it's not there. And I go, dude, I can't find your podcast. And they're like, well, it's on YouTube. And I go, oh, okay. Well, you're not a podcast. So I keep running into that because people think, I don't understand why people aren't going, I'm a YouTuber. My show is called blank.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
There's that. Yeah. And the difference between, and again, the listener doesn't care about this. The podcaster should. If I'm a podcaster and Spotify goes, hey, Dave said something. Dave said the phrase COVID-19, which I've now said, I think 3 times. No, I said COVID 3 times. Now I've said it 4. Oh, stop me before I say it again. But let's say Spotify puts a little blue stripe on me and eventually kicks me off Spotify. If I'm a podcaster, I'm still in business, right? You can listen to me on Apple and Overcast and I'm not done. It's not because it's decentralized. If YouTube doesn't like me and they kick me off, I'm out of business. I got to go to Rumble or get my own Vimeo channel or something like that. Now, does the listener care about that stuff? No. But I'm just telling people like that is something you might want to think about as, people like, I forget the one name of the company that is going through Barometer is scanning and doing transcripts of your content so they can give you a label like you are brand safe. Did I miss anything fun in the of course the chat is always fun.
I think we're good. Yeah, DR just called you a podcast fundamentalist.
Yeah, kind of. And again, I don't want to die on that hill. I really like if somebody goes up to me and they go, "Oh, I have a podcast on YouTube." Oh God, I'm sorry. I mean, it's just no. I'm not like offended. I'm just saying we're making the waters muddy and like call yourself a YouTuber if you're a YouTuber.
But that always happens in these kinds of technologies, right? When we get, they start to mature and then they start to expand and then other people come in and, you can't always control the meaning of the word in that sense. And you have to ask yourself the question, in some cases, why does it even matter?
Yeah.
Like, who cares? Like, let them call it what they want to call it. If they're being successful, awesome. If they're not, it doesn't matter. We don't have to be the podcast name police. You're not a podcast. Exactly.
Give me your
pull
name.
It over, buddy. Pull it over.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, a radio show and a television show are both a broadcast. So, the radio guy could run in and go, "You're not really a broadcast," or a TV guy, that whole 9 yards. So, yeah. Craig says, this is about as fun as Leo Port trying to change the word to netcast.
Yeah, he gave up on that, by the way. In a very public way. I mean, this is one of those things he could have just quietly, in the beginning of the Twitch shows, it says, it used to say netcasts you love from people you trust, right? And then one day it just changed to podcasts you love. He talked about that openly on his podcast and said, "Yeah, I'm giving up. I thought, 10 years ago when we started doing this, I thought netcasts would be, we at Gallup call them webcasts, and I haven't changed that name to podcast yet. But no, actually, no one's ever said it's not a webcast to me. It just doesn't matter that much.
Steven says audio first equals podcast or video first equals YouTuber.
Not true.
Yeah, Dan says, "Hey, hold on," and this is what I say in my YouTube channel. There have been video podcasts since 2005. And if you don't believe me, go to askaninja.com. That guy was so popular, that show ended up on Netflix. And then this thing came along called YouTube and stole a lot of podcasting growth and thunder back in the day.
Wait a minute. If your podcast is on Netflix, is it a podcast?
No, that's how I ended my YouTube channel or video. I said, in the end, we're all content creators. Again, going back to, let's just call it a show.
Right. That's a good call.
Yeah. But speaking of Todd and Rob over at the new media show, I've been having a lot of conversations with Alex from Podmatch. And he was on, I guess, last week. And he had this because he and I were talking about the churn of podcasting. And what I mean by that is somebody shows, we always talk about some people don't make it past episode 7. And we're like, why is that? And I said things like, well, I think a lot of it is really out of line expectations. I'm going to start this. I'm going to be famous. I'm going to be rich. So anyway, Alex said this on the new media show. And I was like, oh, we should probably bring that up here.
I had a comment there. I talked to Jordan Harbinger recently and just asked him, it was like a live thing. And I was just like, hey man, like if you were to start a podcast today and you don't have any reputation, any name, what would you do? And his number one piece of advice I thought was gold. And he said, keep it a hobby as long as you possibly can.
There you go.
And he said, if you start off saying this is a business, you're going to get burnout faster than if you just enjoy the craft that you're doing.
Yeah.
And I think that that's gold advice. And people quit so fast because they're like, I'm supposed to make money with this. It's not making money. I'm out of here. Or I'm supposed to get famous. I'm not famous yet. So I'm out of here. And I found that time and time again.
I just agree with that. To me, I actually almost did a video last week until, somebody poked the bear with YouTube and I was like, I got me there. My inner curmudgeon came out. But I was going to do a video on pod fading, but I love that advice. Like, I do see, I see this a lot again on YouTube. On the YouTubes, I see where, especially if you're getting popular and people that are like, wow, lots and lots and lots of downloads, that eventually I will see the video. There was one from a guy that I really liked. And he it's one of those where he's walking in the park. It's not the high, polished thing. He's like, we need to sit down and talk. And it was basically, he was getting crispy. He was really getting crispy. And he's like, I'm going to back off for a little bit. I'm okay, but I need to take a break. And I remember there was that one, it was a girl who like from the age of 6 wanted to be a YouTuber. And by like 13, she was like millions of downloads. And by 16, she was starting to lose her mind because all she thought about was watch time and algorithm and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, so I love the advice of just, if you don't you don't have to make money with your podcast, and B, just if you want to treat it like a hobby, again, the podcast police are not going to come up and woo, hey, where's your license? I see where you've missed an episode last week. I'm sorry. That's according to bylaw 6.5 paragraph C. You're not allowed to skip weeks because the world will stop listening to you immediately. And so, I mean, Jim, you kind of treat your show like as a hobby at this point.
Oh, for
right?
sure. Yeah. Home Gadget Geeks is a giant hobby. And I've gone, back and forth about whether I want to keep it. We're 564 episodes this week. And, you kind of go, do I want to keep doing it? And I finally just kind of decided, it's just a ton of fun. And it gives me an opportunity to hang out with my friends. And so, at my age, I need all the friends I can get at this point. So you just kind of, enjoy it, doing it. It's just, if you take a week off, you take a week off. I think Clay had said, it took him 5 years. Sure, we'll bring that up on screen. So he says, it took me 5 years of hobby podcasting to make it a business. Just because it's a hobby doesn't mean it can't sound and look professional.
Well, yeah.
And that's true, but it doesn't have to. Like, you can do whatever you want. If you want to goof around, if you want, we make fun of what's two guys and a brain, some of those, if you want to make fart jokes or if you want to get a little inebriated in podcast, you can still do all that, right? You can do it. Your listeners, you may or may not be popular. You may be wildly popular. You never know.
Yeah, and Patrick has a point here. He says, we need a new name for hobby podcast. I know some people get offended when you say hobby podcast because they go too far left. They think Wayne's World, three guys, one brain. And there are people, I mean, I know guys that play the guitar that have no plans of ever doing anything public. They just like playing the guitar. And then there are people like me that for years played in bars every weekend, but that wasn't my profession. It was a hobby. It was something I love to do. And so that's when I say hobby, that's what I say. I'm like, look, if you want to make money with it, fine. You're trying to create great content, but like, to me, the ultimate hobby podcast is building a better Dave. I could care less if anybody listens to that show. It's me spewing nonsense into the ether. If you listen, great. If you don't, you don't. And so
do we even have to say that? Do we have to call it a hobby or professional? Can we just say it's a podcast?
Yeah.
Like why do we even need to break that? Why do we need, because you know what it sounds like? It sounds like we're making excuses. That's what it sounds like. Like, oh, no, that's just my hobby podcast. Right. And I think that's what some people take offense to.
That's a good point.
Right. And so, that's it's just your podcast. Just call it a podcast.
Patrick has a great point. Some hobby podcasts sound better than professional. No, I remember when I understand now why, but when Amy Schumer's podcast came out, it was like her and a friend and a dude, and it sounded like it was recorded in a giant glass box. It turns out it was recorded in a giant glass box, and she was like 7 months pregnant. So I'm like, okay, you get a pass, but it was, I just remember when I heard it, I was like, this is horrible. And it didn't sound like you did any planning. And again, 7 months pregnant,
Well, we just don't have to listen. When Spreaker came out, when Rob Greenlee was over at Spreaker, and they started a Spreaker podcast that I would kind of say was a pro podcast, right? They're all professionals. They're talking about platform stuff. First couple episodes, they were awful. Like Rob was trying to find his way, and it wasn't even Rob. I think he had gotten somebody on the team to get it started, and then the first couple episodes were really weird. Then you can kind of hear it morph. The guy who starts it kind of disappears, and then Rob comes in.
He got one guy that was like a kind of a conspiracy theorist guy.
Alex Exum.
Alex Exum, yes.
Exum.
And it was great because Rob's a great straight man, right? That's what he is. You put Rob next to Todd because Todd will say anything, and then you put Rob next to Alex because Alex was like, that's why aliens are going to take over, blah, blah. You're like, okay. So,
Rich says it's professional if you get paid. I get paid to do Home Gadget Geeks. I don't consider it professional.
Yeah. I got paid to, play the guitar. I think that's the question, I guess. When are you a professional? When it's your sole thing of income? And again, we kind of go back to, does that matter? Like, if I'm a race car driver
and I'm driving for Uber. When somebody gets in, do I say, "Don't worry, I'm a professional driver," because I get paid for it, right? Who cares? Like, you drive, just You're the driver, you're the owner. I think we don't need to get stuck on these titles. I wouldn't use pro or hobby, to be honest. Like, I mean, I do it at work, so technically I get paid for it that way too. So, am I a professional podcaster? I never say that to people. They're like, "What do you do?" Yeah, I make media, because I do more than that. To your point, right? I do creators. I make podcasts. Yeah, I make YouTube videos. I write for them. Not very well, but I write for them. And so, does that make me? So I'm a writer, right? I do things. I write. Does that make me a professional writer? Well, I mean, I could say that if I wanted to, but I don't. So I guess here's the point. You can do whatever you want, to be honest. If you want to call yourself a hobby podcaster, you can. If you want to be a pro podcaster, you don't want to use it, you can. So if anybody tells you otherwise, just say, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Whatever. You know? So
I don't think I'm going to go off as much as, like, I don't think it's going to be another button push. It's just one of those things I'm like, hey, just for the record, that's not really a podcast.
No, don't do it, Dave. Just let them be.
Let it go. Yeah.
Let them be. It's okay. It's not hurting anybody.
Yeah. Coach Dave says, I recently took over hosting a show for a company with committees. Just the word committee makes my sphincter just tighten up a little bit. I had to advocate for independence to keep it fun and innovating. Podcasting by committee with non-podcasters is not so fun. I can't imagine. That sounds yeah. I edit a podcast for brain surgeons, and I will give them credit. They keep raising the bar on horrible audio. And it was just the last one I said, here's the first answer from your guest. And here it is after I got done with it. I said, you can almost understand what he's saying. The first one, it just sounded like he was talking like with his hands up in front of his mouth, and then he turned away. It was just horrible. I was like, dude, I can't. You cannot polish a turd. And he's like, hey, I appreciate the effort. Ken Blanchard has an interesting question. Does building a better Dave help you? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is. It's really. I joke about that. I'm like, that's the cheapest therapy on the planet. And I learned, don't talk about your family in a podcast. But there are times, if there are people, I did a rant once about my church that I always go, man, if they ever heard that, they'd be probably hurt in a way. But I'd also say, hey, everything I said in that was true. Yeah, there are times, I did a thing, and it's just me being goofy half the time. Like around Christmas, I did one on Frosty the Snowman. Was he really just depressed? Snowman, was that like, was that Frosty? Was he trying to do death by cop? You know what I mean? Because he only paused a moment when he heard and then was he suicidal because he knew the sun was hot that day? So just really weird, strange thoughts that I go, yeah, that's a building a better day. When I was married, I'd go off on a weird rant or tangent, and my ex-wife would go, oh my God, is this the next episode of Building a Better Day? Do you, what speed do you listen to your podcasts on?
I usually like 1.3, 1.4. Sometimes I can't take the hosts at those speeds, just to be honest. Like, they already talk fast.
All right.
So I got to dial it down. But generally, like 1.3, 1.4 is kind of where I go.
Because I have the same thing. I love Colin and the other guy from Podcraft. And the second guy, I want to say Michael, but that doesn't sound right. The second guy especially has super, and it's awesome, by the way, a super Scottish accent. And I have to slow down to catch him. It's so cool. Yeah, I see everybody in the chat 1.2, 1.25, because Adam Curry is making a point. He's doing, my YouTube is Adam Curry's fast casting, I think he's what he's calling it. And he's like, why are we all listening at 1.5, 1.7? And he said people are saying, yeah, Dave's like 1.8. Tim says 1.5 of them editing, normally 1.0. And he said and this would be me. I'm like, hey, I'm trying to listen to as many podcasts as I can. And sometimes I have to listen. I'm trying to get through, all the cat talk and French toast recipes as somebody gets to, I reviewed a show on the Podcast Rodeo Show, and they say in their description, the interview starts at 6 minutes. And I was like, that's interesting. I wonder what they talk about for 6 minutes. And I don't know why co-hosts figure out, like when Jim comes on, he's like, hey, Jim, glad to have you, blah, 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 yada, yada, yada. And Jim doesn't go on for 4 minutes trying to be funny, and then we just we stumble our way into a coffee pour and we're off to the races. And these guys were just going off about, first of all, it's a show about professional wrestling. And the first co-host decided to talk about hockey. And I'm like, is this a hockey podcast? And then the second guy started talking about baseball. And finally, the actual host was like, well, meanwhile, back in pro wrestling, And so my question is, are we listening at faster speeds because, well, we have to get through all the crap?
I don't think so. I mean, I think sometimes maybe, but I think because it's not like you listen faster speeds and then slow it down for the good stuff, right? I still listen to it. I think we can hear and understand faster. Like we're just able to do that. So I could get, during COVID, I wasn't in the car as much. So of course I wanted to get through as many podcasts as I could that I was falling behind on. Right now, it didn't change the way I listened to it, but I listen to them faster because I want to get more content in, is why I want to do it. So there's a couple hosts that I listen to and they step all over each other all the time and they're talking over each other and then they're goofy and even fast, I get frustrated. I'm like, oh, okay, guys, 30, let's get past that point. Or sometimes this week I just shut one off. I'm like, all right, I need a break. My brain needs a break from listening to these yahoos.
That's what Adam is saying. Is his thing is people are finding that they are now more patient with their children because, a kid, if you ever hear a kid tell a story, this one time, and then the thing happened, and then so-and-so, and then so-and-so, you're like, okay, what's the point of this story? And he's like, so when your kid can't get to the point and they're talking slow and they're all over the place, we want our people in life to be like a podcast. And so we may be less patient if we're used to listening at 1.5. And I was like, I'm not sure I buy that. I get the point, but it was just an interesting thing. And Patrick says interviews don't have to be the main course. No, it's weird. I still listen to it. I have the direct opposite. I listen to the intro of Mark Maron's show. And many times I don't want to hear from his guest. I skip and it's like 10 minutes of just inside jokes on Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend. Cause he's kind of taken a page out of Howard Stern's book and makes fun of his team. And I'm like, I don't care about your team and I don't get the joke. Craig says, it's an information podcast. If it's an information podcast with a slow speaker, he will speed it up. If it's a drama-based podcast, I never would. Drama-based, although I want to, because I've found many drama-based podcasts get lost in the sound effects. They really, and to their credit, they make some really cool soundscapes, but there are times when I'm like, I get it. The person's walking up the stairs, but like, is this the stairway to heaven? There's like 47,000 steps here that we've heard. And I get it that it's raining outside, but what's the next thing? So if you were editing say you were doing your own podcast and you'd interviewed somebody and they were generally slower to get to the point. Yeah, you edit them for content. You might take some things out of there that don't matter but would you speed them up on the recording? Right? Yeah. The only person I've ever sped up is, again, the brain surgeon people that I edit for, because, and this is to their credit, they mute when they're not talking. So number one, I never have to worry about people talking over each other. But what will happen is the person will end the end of their question. And so there's this weird pause where they're hitting mute. And then there's a pause where the doctor's figured out, he's done talking, and he will unmute. So you have these ginormous pauses in between the end of an answer and that. So I will go in and like, okay, let's make this look like it was a conversation. But now the only time I speed people up is if they repeat themselves. I'll see people do that. They'll say something, then they'll kind of say it again. I'm like, yeah, we already heard that. I just heard, I was reviewing a member of the School of Podcasting, and he said something about whatever it was, blah, 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 tagline for the episode. And then he said at the beginning, He did his little intro, introduced himself, blah, 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 tagline for the episode. I'm like, okay, cool. And then he took a little tangent, and then he said the tagline again. I'm like, we got it. We understand what the episode's about. Quit telling me what it's about and just do the episode. So that was one where I'd be like, okay, I'd kind of speed things up. So Ken brings up a good point. He's going back to building a better day, but we can treat this like a new question. If you are super transparent in your show, could that hurt your brand? Yeah. Or do you not promote it? Well, number one, I don't promote building a better Dave. It's not that there's anything that risky or weird over there. I've told the story before. I'll make it quick. When I first started that show, I was going to work blue. And I did an episode that if Amish people don't have electricity, does that mean there's no Amish porn? And then I had all sorts of double entendre, Zebediah, plow my bean field kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And I had 3 people come out of like one guy was a Cleveland Brown. It was the weirdest call ever. And he's like, hey, I listened to your show. And he's like, I also listened to the School of Podcasting. Like, this isn't you. Like, why are you doing this? He goes, it's weird. And I was like, oh, okay. Because number one, it was weird to have a Cleveland Brown call you. And I'm like
a football player?
Like an actual professional football. I should know his name, but this was,
oh, nice. Well,
years ago.
But put that on your resume when you're saying, Hall of Famer and NFL.
Yeah. NFL players listen to my show. And so I quit doing it. And that was also the one, and to finish this story is when I was dating my ex-wife, we got to the point where it was time to meet the kids. And so I get there and I meet her kids, and the 16-year-old goes upstairs and Googles Dave Jackson. And of course, what does she find but the episode about Amish porn, which is still online, by the way. Really? But it's always a thing. If I ever do anything risky, I'm just like, because for me, it's always like, well, what if my church hears this? But like there's one called the Bondage Barn where me and David Hooper and a bunch of guys at Podfest went to an actual dungeon. And I said, I will go in the name of science, which I did. Mm-hmm. And this reported on. And I'm like, look, I'm not participating, but it was a very weird experience. And my favorite was Mark Johansson referred to it as Satan's CrossFit. It was but it was an interesting story. And that's kind of my thing. It's either, I was like, well, if nothing else, this will be a good story for the podcast.
Well, in both those examples, you're out of character, right? To use that term, where your brand is X, and then your brand became triple X, right? Yeah. And that was out of character, right? Yeah. That was like, oh yeah, and listen, we do, especially the longer we podcast, we gather a group around us who are very used to the consistent content that we create, whether it's goofy or serious or whatever, right? I mean, if you're consistent in your podcast methodology and the way you do it, you'll gather a group of people who want and listen to it because they like it, right? So when you go off color, whatever, when you get off brand, it's shocking to them. And listen, when you did episode 400 on School of Podcasting, and that was so different, that's a risk, right? And I'm sure you could have gotten some feedback that said, yeah, don't go that was fun once. Like, don't do that all the time. We actually want some serious content.
Well, I did one where Master Cauldron, who's an awesome supporter, who does a show about BDSM, and I forget how it came up or whatever, but there was something, and I made a joke about his show, and I made like a jingle to the no 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 whatever. These are a few of my favorite things.
Yeah.
And I remember it was something like I think I said the word nipple clamp or something, and I had somebody say, I didn't tune into the School of Podcasting to hear this filth.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, nipple clamp is filthy. I'm like,
well, for some it is. For some it's a little shocking.
Yeah. So it was just, and it was a joke. It was an obvious joke. And I played it for him. I'm like, hey, can I, I don't want to offend the BDSM KY, whatever, he's like, dude, this is hilarious. Can I play it on my show? And I was like, well, if he's fine with it, so.
Yeah, but that's probably a smaller, School of Podcasting it's a clean podcast. Like you come at that pretty professionally, pretty right. And then then you show up in an alternative way. Not that that's wrong. Like that's
Right.
you can do anything.
Yeah.
But
See,
you
to me,
shock your audience, right?
Yeah.
You shock your audience. They're used to one thing. You provided another.
It's the Howard Stern in me. I want to go right to that line. But the problem is, sometimes I think I'm right at the line and some of my audience is going to go,
well,
you kind of crossed it.
If you regularly went to the line, like every show, like Howard goes to every show, he goes to the line. If you regularly did that, then those listeners who don't like that would leave, and you wouldn't get that negative.
Well,
feedback,
I lost
right?
one. Yeah, I remember. I forget her name, but she used to listen when she was doing the dishes. She was awesome, and she just said, "I used to recommend the show. I'm not anymore." And I went, "All right, well, it is." And that's where somebody, it might have been Clay. Somebody said, "I think we underestimate losing members. That we work so hard to get them, but on the other hand, it's Patrick says that's probably why I never enjoyed listening to the podcast rodeo show. I like the nice Dave.
Yeah,
the one that just
I've never listened. Listen, I've never listened to the podcast rodeo show. I can't. That doesn't work for me. It makes me very uncomfortable. So yet I show up with you every Saturday because the podcast rodeo brand, Dave, is different than Ask the Podcast Coach brand.
I try to be nicer, Dave. The last one I just did, because it was pretty bad. I kind of went, should I have taken a second? But yeah, that's just, that whole show is just weird. Anyway, Ken Blanchard said out of character is excellent. Yeah. Clay says, when I've released some content outside of my niche, I do it as a bonus episode. There you go. That way you're not.
You should also warn, if you're going to add some color to it like that way, you should probably say, hey, this episode contains some content that may not be appropriate for everyone. I just want to warn you up front. And I think sometimes and again, you can do anything you want in this space. Yes. What we're talking about is the consequences of the things that you do.
That's it.
So don't be surprised if you do something and you're like, oh, I'm just doing my art, man. You say that a lot better than I do.
It's my art, man. Come on. It's just my art. Yeah.
You can do your art. Just don't be surprised when it does something. And I think DR made a comment a second ago, like, you got to take some chances. You're going to offend someone. I think there's a difference between offending someone and offending most of your audience.
Yeah.
Right. And you can do that. I think I've told this story, but I was in Bible college. I went to a Christian liberal arts school, and I got up on the platform. I said, so this is a whole bunch of like missionaries and it's a pretty conservative audience. And I get up there, this is the 90s. And I say, sometimes this world really sucks.
Oh boy.
Right. I was from California. We said that all the time. Yeah. I didn't think that was, so the dean came to me and said, you shouldn't have said that. And I said, say what? No, I thought he was talking about the message. And he's like, no, the S word. And I was like, oh, did I say from the platform? Right. And I'm racking my brain. And finally he couldn't even say the word. He mouths it to me.
Well, right? in our buddy Daniel J. Lewis in his last episode will not say the name of Mark Maron's show, even though it's just 3 letters.
Yeah.
Right. So I'll say it. It's WTF. And in Daniel's world, because it's an abbreviation of a swear word, he's like, nope, not even going to go there. And that's perfectly fine. You're allowed, again, it's your show. Do and talk however you want.
In some cases, when I said that word, right?
Yeah.
In some audiences, that would have no effect. Most of the students would be fine. But most of the audience there was not most of the students. It was a whole bunch of others. And his wise words to me were, Jim, you really need to make sure when you're talking, you understand your audience. He used the word exegete, which is a word we use to really pull apart and understand and get the context of. And so I think sometimes that can be, we feel like, well, I'm just going to say this. And it's like, well, then you're just going to face the consequences.
That's it.
So good luck.
Yeah. I once from the pulpit was talking about, there's a story of a dude in the Bible that was going around beating people with a jawbone, and I will say donkey.
Samson. Yes.
Yeah. Samson was doing this, right? And in the Bible, it says ass. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I'm like, so I can't believe this guy. And I said the phrase piece of ass in church because I could.
Yeah, but you shouldn't have.
And people were like, yeah. I'm like, oh, come on. It's true. So that's the kind of stuff that I'm like, get it? See? And then they're like, yeah.
Then you could have said, well, now you're more worried that I said that than that people are, anyway. So
yeah, always fun. So
well,
we have 4 questions on deck here, but before we do those,
can I get a coffee while you're setting that up?
Get a coffee.
Can you play
as soon as I find the right, there we go. That is awesome. And while you're the awesome supporter, according to the woman in the tube this morning, is the one and only Glenn Hebert from the Horse Radio Network. If you like horsies, go check out Glenn at horseradionetwork.com. So Glenn, thanks for being an awesome supporter. If you'd like to be an awesome supporter, go over to askthepodcastcoach.com/support. And if you Ask the Podcast Coach runs on Podpage, as does the Podcast Rodeo Show, Podcast Consultant, and many others. If you want to try Podpage, use my affiliate link, trypodpage.com, and check it out. And if you just need more Jim Collison in your life, go over to the averageguy.tv and check out Home Gadget Geeks. And if you're looking to start a podcast, I'm in the middle right now of moving the school of podcasting. I am so excited and yet so tired. Man, it takes a lot of time because I'm redoing the course area and I'm redoing the community is going to be tied together. It's going to be great fun. If you're ready to start, schoolofpodcasting.com. Use the coupon code COACH after 1 o'clock today, and you will receive 20% off because my new system doesn't allow me to have 3-letter coupons anymore. So when I put in ask as the coupon, it's like, no, you can't do that. So if you'd like to be an awesome supporter, go over to askthepodcastcoach.com/support. We lost an awesome supporter, which I understand. It's interesting because in Patreon, they let you go through and see, like, why did you leave? And everybody has the same answer, and that is my financial situation has changed. And I'm like,
which means you have room for another one now, right? If somebody else wanted to jump in there. And,
somebody wants to jump in.
Wow.
There you go. Here's a fun one. I would like to hear what her answer is to this. DR is asking, any ideas on promo ideas for a new podcast? If you go over to schoolofpodcasting.com and search for 33, I think I have an episode on 33 ways. I mean, some of them are like easy and you don't realize how many people, like one is make sure you have in your signature of your email a link to your website. And I remember once I put a trackable link in that and I was amazed at how many people, like either they're emailing me or I'm emailing them or whatever. They're like, who is this guy? Click, so, I mean, that's one. We could go through the laundry list, right? Social media, even though that's not really, that's a trickle when it's working. Be on other shows, go to where your audience is, make friends with them, tell them about your show, business cards. I don't know, Jim, what am I missing? Guests,
Two really effective that I think are explosive growth. One is just get lucky. Like
that's it.
Right. Most of the
right
time,
place at the right time. Do that.
I don't think most of these are like slow growth, right? They just, they create slow growth. If you get lucky, you get mentioned somewhere or whatever, that can cause, because nobody wants to do slow growth. They're just, I don't have time for slow growth. I want it fast. The other one is paid advertising. Like if you want to, if you want to get lucky, you got to pay for it. So find some places where that will advertise for you and a place where it'll be effective on the podcast. No guarantees on that, by the way. I mean, you have to have a compelling offer. You have to have great ads, Yeah.
I just listened to the Buzzcast and they interviewed a guy and he said he was getting 5,000 downloads. Now I don't know how much this would cost, but he bought 50,000 impressions. So my guess is that was a lot. And he went from 5,000 downloads a month to 7. Yeah. So, it's a growth, but I don't know how much that was. And he's not even monetizing. He's just trying to do step 1, grow an audience. And so for him, he's like, well, go back to the old movie example, right? That's what the movies do. They try to make the best content they can. They spend a bunch of money on promotion and hope that the people that find the movie go tell their friends. So, and then she had another question. A friend is running for our local council. She talked to me about doing a podcast. Is there an equal time in podcasting? I have no idea, as there is in broadcast or TV radio. I don't believe so, because it's not over the public airwaves. You have to pay to get a podcast. And you're like, really? I thought they're all free. You paid for the internet. You don't pay. Like there's the airwaves. I could put up an antenna right now and pick up the TV.
So it's a really good question, though. I'm wondering, in some advertising space, of course, advertising on television is controlled by the FTC here in the United States, FTC, right. And they have certain regulations for that. Radio is under the same. I don't think podcast advertising is yet governed by that same system. I don't know. It's a good question.
It's interesting because it is that you have to disclose. If you're getting, like, if a guest is paying you to be on your show, that has to be disclosed. But
yeah, FCC. Sorry, that was my mistake. FCC. That's correct. David corrected me on that one. That's good. Yeah. I don't know. You'd have to look into that. I would think, man, local politics on a podcast. That is, talk about niching down and trying to find out where those ads would go to make that kind of work. I mean, ads don't. Yeah, that'd be tough. That'd be tricky. That may be more work than it's worth, just to be honest.
I would definitely do it.
Look into.
If I was a politician, I would have definitely my own podcast. I would be, explaining what's going on, and
just think about city. Have your own podcast for sure. Yeah. Just have your own local podcast and. Expect the numbers to be super small. Yeah. But super engaged.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's the perfect example of a way to talk to everybody all at the same time, especially during a busy campaign season.
Well, the beauty of a podcast is it's not live. So you can, like right now, we're kind of cherry picking the questions here. And for the record, if I missed one, feel free to send it back through. And because sometimes the chat gets going and I miss them. But on a political show, you can have your cousin call in a question and then you could answer that question, but by doing that, the vibe you're sending is that you're a warm, caring person and you want to do the best for your community. I would definitely have a political podcast, and I would definitely, that is a form of propaganda, by the way. It's called Like One of Us. That's where you see, the president-elect coming. He's got his flannel on and his coffee cup, and he's going to get a hot dog down at Joe's Diner and shake some hands and get out there with his, he's got a straw in his teeth, like, okay, great. I see what you're doing there, buddy, but
why did that instantly go to a Midwest genre?
I've seen that. I mean, Kansas. I remember Obama eating the ice cream. I'm like, he's doing the ice cream thing. I know that move, and Bill Clinton, like, I'll take a hot dog. That'd be great. Yeah.
My favorite Obama meme is when he's sitting down and he's got a cookie and he tries to dip the cookie in the milk, but the cookie's too big and it just gets stuck on the top of the glass. And he goes, bong. And he goes, thanks, Obama.
Nice. And New Age Human says, any advice on creating a show series under one podcast with their own subject matter? I'm not quite sure I understand the question. Creating a different show under one podcast. Okay. There was one that I listened to. Number one, I would put them in series. That would actually be a decent example of when do I use series. I just know I was upset because the second season was about a Cleveland radio station and the history of it. And they hadn't changed their artwork to reflect the new season. And so I listened to it, I hit play, and I'm ready. I'm stoked to hear this because I love this. If you ever hear me talk about Home of the Buzzard, it was the history of the Buzzard. And I hit play, and it's the history of a amusement park. And I was like, what? I'm like, no good darn tootin', you tricked me, right? And because I didn't understand that every series was different. So I would definitely say, let your audience know that, hey, this series is on thing. I talked earlier about Podcraft. They do that. This series, we're going to talk about microphones. next series we're going to talk about blah blah blah. So Colin and his co-host, who I still cannot remember. Jim, any other ideas on I would make sure that the different series, all like his with Podcraft, they're all about podcasting, but I wouldn't like, hey, series 1 is about, I'll give you an example. The first, everybody talks about Serial. That was a true crime show. And the second one was about some soldier dude that went AWOL. And while it was an interesting story, it wasn't true crime, kind of, right? I just know that everybody was like, this is not as good. So you have to be careful. But
if you're going to keep it all in the same feed, there's a lot of problems with that. And it can work. But you said, like titling or seasoning, you got to get for the titles, you got to get a really short identifier up front so they know which is which. If they're gonna have all this different content in the feed, you want to give them a visual clue to be like, hey, oh yeah, that's this podcast, or yeah, this is the other podcast. So, but once you start doing it, your audience will figure it out, right? It may stop people from listening to it, it may not. But once your audience gets used to it, then you start getting subscribers. Just make sure you keep it consistent so they know. It's all about predictability, right? It's all about me.
Yeah.
I get super mad when I can't find things that have changed based on the way I consume them before. It doesn't mean I unsubscribe. I just get a little frustrated. And sometimes I don't. I mean, there's some podcasts that have changed the way they've done things, and then I've just stopped listening to them, and then I forget about them, right? The whole concept of brand is to keep you in front of your customer, top of mind at all times, right? That's the whole idea of brand. If they think about something, they think about you in that. If you make things hard for them, you're going to make it harder for them to have you top of mind, and they're going to stop thinking. We have enough things to think about, right? So just make sure you're making it easy for them.
Yeah, which kind of ties into JD's question. Is there a good tool for making a master feed for a network of shows? I looked into this a while ago. There are tools out there. I can't think of them because I think in the end I went, because I was going to make one for all my podcasting shows. And so you could just, here's, all things Dave kind of thing. And they were, the free ones especially weren't that great. And about that time I dropped the idea. So I don't know anyone. Many moons ago, Yahoo had a great one, but much like many things at Yahoo, they don't exist anymore. So I'm not sure. I know if you're using Libsyn Pro, they give you an all-in-one feed. I believe Captivate gives you an all-in-one feed because you can have a network on Captivate without having like a pro level thing. So depending on who you are,
WordPress would do this for you. Like you can have a master WordPress feed, and then you can still have individual feeds that you submit different RSS feeds. So you'd have an RSS feed of them all. Some of the host providers do this as well. I think, who do I use that? I guess Spreaker does this as well. Spreaker has a master feed. That's everything based on the shows. And then, but WordPress would be a great way to do it. Then you can also use either categories or channels with the, what's the name of the plugin?
PowerPress.
PowerPress. Thank you. And you could create sub feeds for those. So you could still have individuals and one master feed, and you could create a pretty cool website around it as well. So that may be the best, JD. That was JD's question, right?
Yeah.
That I think WordPress may be the best way to get it done. And it's kind of designed for it. And I don't know about WordPress.com, the plugins for that, but I know if you definitely have your own WordPress instance.
The only thing I hate about that is I don't trust WordPress enough to
really
put. No, I don't.
All right. Okay.
I mean, about every year and a half, I end up with the WordPress, and I just know if I didn't have WordFence protecting the school of podcasting, I'd be in a world of hurt because I get reports on a regular basis that, people in Bagakistan are trying to hack the school of podcasting. And I'm like, and they've blocked like 300 attempts and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, So yeah, I know I'm in a minority, but I'm not. I've just had, well, even right now, if you go to the school of podcasting, it's one of those things, it's on my list of like, As soon as I get done with all this stuff, I'm going to attack that. If you go to schoolofpodcasting.com/episodes, I'm using Elementor. I think I might have actually dumped it for this page, but you will see a list of my episodes, and I think there's like 9 on there, and then it's the same list again. It's duplicating my episodes, and I was like, and I go in and I'm like, that's so weird, and I've looked at the code, and I'm like, I don't know why it's doing it. It doesn't make any sense, and it's just like, whatever, you know what I mean? Who's going to scroll to the bottom of the page anyway? I'll leave it there. So that's just one where I'm like, WordPress. So
can you do this on Podchaser? Like they are the Swiss Army knife of podcast tools. Would Podchaser be able? I that may be something to look into. JD, look at Podchaser and see if they have a way of, because I mean the easiest way to do this would just be create another feed and then you upload, right? That's more hosting, right? That is granted, right? And it's double work. But maybe you can create a list on Podchaser that can also be turned into an RSS feed.
I wonder if it's still around. I mean, literally, this is how I made my first. It's still around. Oh wow! Everybody, if you want to see what websites looked like in 2005, go to feedforall.com. Holy cow! That's special right there. It's you literally. You're not hand coding your feed, but you're pretty doggone close to it. But because you basically have to upload that to something like, you could use bunny.net, which is a CDN. But yeah, this is what websites looked like in 2005. But it's a tool, and you basically put in, here's the title, here's the description, and it gives you that text file that is your feed, that gobbledygook. And so you could throw that on a CDN or whatever. And so if you had the direct link to all the MP3 files, in theory, you could fill that in and make your own. Because that's how we did it in 2005. We made our own RSS feeds and we liked it. Yeah. So
the most recent, latest news on that site you just showed was from March 25th of 2013. It's been 9 years.
Yeah.
Since anybody posted that.
Going back to the whole political thing, it is. I met Jody at Podfest. So, hey, Jody. Said, good morning, folks. Hi, Chris. iHeart and easy for me to say. See, I should have Jody reading this because she does this for like a living. At SXM. Yes, Dave. Yeah, sorry, Jim. Do a ton of podcast advertising because she voices some of it. So I imagine it's part of the advertising budget that you'd be obligated to divulge. But it may be that iHeart, by the way, number 1 in podcasting, and SXM report that sort of thing. I suppose it depends on who's hosting the podcast and what their policies are. But there are plenty of political podcasts. Yeah, there sure are. I just heard a report on one, and I actually, we say most promos stink. They don't make me want to listen. I listened to Podcast Bestie, which is a new podcast from somebody who's running a Substack. And they had a promo for Bad Watchdog, and it's a 6-part series. And I think that was the key. That wasn't an ongoing podcast, but it was basically. And the part of me in the car, I'm like, do I really need to see more government corruption? Like, do I need more government corruption in my life? But that's basically what it was. It was called Bad Watchdog, and I was like, yeah, I might actually go listen to that. So. Yes, Jody's like, I remember those days when we would hand roll the RSS feed and you'd have 1 comma wrong and the whole thing would, or if we go back to Jim's nerd days, Jim, do you remember the phrase?
Wait a minute. Hold on. Back to them?
Yeah. Well,
did I ever leave them?
But do you remember the phrase bad syntax error?
Oh, yeah. Oh, for sure.
That was one of those like, hey, guess what? You typed something wrong. Yes. What is it? We're not going to tell you. You have
no error codes. Or the days of Microsoft giving you error codes that meant nothing. You couldn't find out what they were. Right. XLM 4479 bad error. And you're like, okay, what is that? And then you have no idea. Yeah.
Oh, JD says, my client is on Spreaker and they just killed that feature. Now, the interesting thing is, and I'm going to email James Cridlin because he actually announced in Pod News. I woke up to this phrase and I was like, wait a minute, did I hear that right? because I had here, Spreaker is now free, claiming it's the first ever professional level podcast platform to be available at no cost. What does that mean to you, Jim?
It means it's free, no cost. They were the first ever. That's what that means.
Features like the unlimited storage and programmatic monetization, previously only available in a $250 a month at the enterprise package from iHeart owned platform, meaning Spreaker, and are free for all podcast creators. The release describes existing free alternatives as mediocre, so they're poking Anchor here, and very basic. Willing to a deep dive. We will link to a deep dive today in their platform from Sounds Profitable. I had Otter transcribe that because I'm like, did I miss something? Because if you
go into effect, like it's not showing on their. I mean, I still see their $250 plan.
Bingo, that's what I said. I'm like, did I miss something? Like, because it sure sounded like he said Spreaker is now free, claiming it's the first ever professional level podcast platform to be available at no cost. And I went over and I'm like, that's really odd because for a free platform, they have lots of pricing plans.
Well, so maybe that just hasn't all gone in yet. Maybe that's just a press release out ahead of it. That's
my guess. Because I'm like, usually, I don't usually have to fact check.
So is this the first big change with iHeart? Now kind of in charge over there?
Well, that was the thing, is he said they used to be number 3 in hosting or something like that, and they'd fallen a few spots. And I'm like, so when I hear a company is falling and they throw out the free lifeline, I'm like, that's not a good business model, kids. Like,
well, but okay, this is the Spotify model because they're owned by iHeart, right? So iHeart's making the money. Like like in Spotify, they're making money off subscriptions and advertising, not hosting. And so that's the YouTube model. YouTube's doing just fine without having to charge people to host their videos, right? So this is the YouTube model, and I think they're gonna. We'll have to see, but in this kind of case, it looks like they're making that switch, which is good for me because I'm a corporate. Just full disclosure, I'm a corporate user of Spreaker. We went on Spreaker 10 years ago when we started podcasting at Gallup. Started using them. I got grandfathered into their best pricing plan, which was everything for free, and I've been using that at work, everything for free for the longest time. They've sent me a note 2 years ago. It said, hey, that's going to stop this thing in 2023, which back in 2021 during the pandemic seemed like forever ago. But in October, I'm supposed to switch over to their Anchorman or whatever the highest one is. And I budgeted for it. And I told, hey, we've been getting this for free for 10 years, but we're going to start paying for it. So if I read this right, I'm going to get that for free now. And
that's the part I'm like, James just said this, but the website says this. And the thing because now all the Anchor people that have been saying, hey, where are the ads that you promised us? And there aren't any, are going to run over to Spreaker. And I have a bow. I mentioned this in my book, Profit from Your Podcast.
Book?
Proven Strategies to Turn Your Listeners into Livelihood. When I was using Voxer, which was owned by Spreaker, which is now owned by iHeart, which is owned by whoever. That's where I was getting paid the 0.00017 cents. So I was making a whopping $1.70 per 1,000 downloads. And I went, I can almost buy a Mountain Dew after that episode. When everybody hears, oh, there's ads over there. If you take 300 and multiply that by 0.00017, it's not a lot of money. So now it's better than a poke in the eye. But if I have a choice of making my audience listen to an ad or earn 27 cents, I'll take the hit on that. I'll make my audience not have to sit through a Geico ad to get through that. But it is confusing because I put out as soon as I heard that, because I mean, James is the first voice I hear when I wake up. He's on the woman in the tube from Amazon. And so I'll say, play my flash briefing, and it gives me the weather and stuff. And then James comes on and I hear, Spreaker's now free. And I was like, say what? And I get up and I was like, well, so I did
I'll have to go read their press release because that's important to me now. I mean, I'd look like a hero if they went free and we kept the unlimited, and because I think we have 9 podcasts out there, 9 or 10, maybe more. I think maybe 12 now. And they're all active, and we have 4 million downloads out there. So
yeah. JD says, hey, I'm on Spreaker as well, and they're certainly still charging me. They haven't sent any users any email about moving to free, but if I log out and look at the plans page, it still shows a low tier is free. And that's I'd kind of mentioned this to Todd Cochran, and he said it sounds like they're just moving, like they're still going to have a paid plan, but maybe they're expanding what their free does. And I was like, So we're all kind of waiting for this to kind of shake out. Jody has my favorite comment ever. I say this all the time. Make ads that sell your own stuff. That's why if you want to add, I really don't like having advertisers on the School of Podcasting because I make much more money selling my own stuff. And that's when Dan from Focusrite, he's like, I want to advertise on your show. I go, I am not cheap, because I said, I am not going to add your ad to my ad. Your ad is going to replace my ad for my stuff. I said, because I don't really do that long a show. I don't want to have all the ads in it. And so, but that is, there's a an email newsletter called The Tilt from the people at Content Marketing World. It's the guy, Joe Paluzzi, something like that. It's called The Tilt. And they did a survey of, I think it was 1,400 entrepreneurs. My mouth has decided not to work today.
That's okay. You've been talking a lot.
Close enough.
Can I?
And the number one way 1,400 entrepreneurs made money was selling their own products and services. Mm-hmm. And then when I hear Rob on the feed explain that less than 10% of podcasts get enough downloads to get, quote, a big sponsor, I'm like, why does everybody not see that means 90% of podcasters don't get it? But yet everybody's like, oh, I'm going to start a podcast and get ads. And I'm like, all right, well, again, everybody's got a goal. And if you have a niche show, the fact that I even get a sponsor, I'm nowhere near the 10,000 downloads you need to get a sponsor. But Dan from Focusrite wanted to get to podcasters, and well, I've got them. So you were going to say something.
Yeah, let me just share that free speech plan there. There we go. This is Spreaker from iHeartRadio, or from iHeart, I guess is what they're saying now. No credit card, customizable RSS feeds, make money with ads. This is a change. 6 months of stats, but unlimited episodes. And I think they're limiting it to one podcast. I don't think you can have multiple. And this is maybe going back to what they're talking about before. When I logged into my free account this morning, it was telling me I had too many podcasts because I had 2 in there, and it was saying you're over your limit. So I think that free plan is going to be limited to one podcast. What'll be interesting is to see if they switch that across all their podcast feeds, because we have a ton. This is their pro plan here at $250 a month is kind of where we're heading, because we just have have so many podcasts out there.
Yeah.
So I have to contact them. Maybe I'll send them a note this week and say, hey, I need to talk to somebody, because it's not clear what exactly is going on with you guys.
Yeah. I'm gonna send an email to James and just go, what? Can you expand on that a bit?
Well, they may be rolling this out too. It's complicated to roll out all these changes and get all the timing right, and some of these kinds of things. I've been going through that this week at work. We have a big change happening as well, and getting all that communication out to customers who don't check their email, who don't pay attention, who come back all of a sudden one day, go, wait, what? I'm gone for 2 months and things change? Well, yeah, they do actually. Yeah, they do change.
Yeah, that's we have a thing coming out from Libsyn that I just did the video for, that's coming out in probably a couple weeks, because I just said, hey, can we not roll that out while I'm at Podcast Movement? I'm like, that would be bad. So yeah, the in theory, Todd did a good job of this when they rolled out all the Podcasting 2.0 features into Blueberry. Is they had the documentation ready, because that makes no sense to go, hey, here's a new thing, hope you figure out how to use it, kind of thing. You got to have the documentation, but it is tricky to have everything lined up. One other thing, if you hadn't heard, the new Infinite Dial came out from Edison Research. So there's 17% of the public that doesn't know what a podcast is, or have never heard the word podcast. So that's kind of interesting. But the listening one, I always tell people it's gone up pretty much every year. There was one in here, this one, in 2013 where they changed the criteria of what a podcast was, and it took a dip there. But here you can see this was the pandemic, right? We took a big old, from 20 to 21, we were rising, but then when everybody went back to work, the listening went down to 38%. And now we're back up to 42, which is higher than 2021. So 120 million people. And that's one of those things where we go, can we all just pause and think about 120 million people listen to podcasts on a monthly basis? They have so more men are listening than women in 2023, but both have gone up. So that's good. Wow, that's interesting. Age 12 to 34. I guess that makes sense. Because when I see 12, I'm thinking kids, but I'm like, yeah, but that's a pretty wide range, actually, when you think about it. But weekly podcast listening up to 31%, 89 million people. So I always want to look at this slide of monthly, 42% have listened once a month. Or no, if we go to this, right? Isn't this the people, 64 million are listening, but why is that the case that only 31% are listening on a weekly basis? I'm like, that's a pretty big jump. But, maybe again, it goes into, which is one of the next slides here that I thought was cool. I remember when this slide was, people were listening to 7 podcasts a week. Well, first it was 6, then it was 7. And now we're up to U.S. weekly podcast listeners average 9 podcasts. And I believe that is meant to be episodes. We don't know if it's episodes of the same show. So if it's a daily show, things like that. But I just know that number has gone up. So, but they basically said, yeah, we're post-pandemic, so numbers are going up. Online audio has hit new heights, and they kind of describe that. That's the whole, like, iHeartRadio on an app is now online radio because it's not a podcast, but it's streaming kind of stuff. So, and advertisers need to move more of their budgets into audio. And that's the thing when we were talking about ads earlier, when Spreaker says, hey, and I get it, it's an ad move. We're going to give you the ability to run ads in your show. I was watching, it was it might have been something with a bunch of zoos on it, Animal Planet. And I'm watching it through Google TV. And it goes to a commercial and it said, enjoy your moment of Zen. And it was just this peaceful river because they didn't have an ad. And I was like, wait a minute, like, why not, if nothing else, promote one of your other shows? It's just this whole thing of
that takes a lot of work though to fill that with, because you don't want to get in that situation where you're showing one ad over and over and over and over and over again, right? Yeah. And so you got to get a bunch of ads, then you got to programmatically put them in to make that work. And building a good ad is hard. So one good Zen, and that's goodwill, right? People are like, oh. I mean, all of a sudden, imagine you're just getting blasted with ads, and like, here's 30 seconds of Zen, and you're like, oh, well, that's pretty nice,
I went through YouTube TV, and I didn't know I had this option, but it's in the app where you can go through and say, I'm never going to watch Home Garden TV. I know that's sacrilege for some people.
Was that me?
That was me, and I'm like, wait, I've turned off my notifications. Why am I getting a notification? But we will turn that off. It's just letting me know that we're down to the final minutes of
we're coming in hot.
I've got a thing at noon, so
okay. So let's wrap it up.
We might end a little early.
Yeah.
So I've ended up watching new channels that I normally don't watch because I was like, oh, I've never watched this. Like, there's Comedy Central, but there's another one, and it's interesting, especially if I got on the one night I walked out, and it turns out I was watching something with the Golden Girls. I don't know what channel that was on, but I just left the TV on. And it's interesting when you watch different channels because they have a different audience. And I'm learning about some really interesting products that are never going to be advertised on mainstream media because it costs too much. But it was like, it was some sort of broom, infomercial kind of thing. And I was like, that looks kind of cool. So it was just from a podcasting standpoint, it was like, oh, look here, different audience, different ads, and that kind of ties it into the talk of advertising here, that make sure your ads meet your audience. That's another thing Alex said. He was talking about how basically people are coming in, we kind of hint on burnout. People come into podcasting, they don't listen to podcasts about podcasting. Or here's the other thing I see that happens a lot. there are so many options, right? If you think about it, how should I record my interviews? Should I use Clean Feed or Riverside or Libsyn Connect or Squadcast? There's too many choices. So what do? They ask me, they ask David Hooper, they ask Matthew Passy, and they get like 15 different answers. And so what happens is people don't take any steps forward because they don't know which one it is. And, I took a step and went with Podia for the School of Podcasting. 8 months later, I'm moving. Why? Because it, in the end, wasn't really the right choice. And I was like, yeah, so if you start using Riverside and it craps out on you, all right, don't use it anymore. Move to something else. It's not that big a deal. So, but anyway, Jim, what is coming up on Home Gadget Geeks this week?
Yeah, my daughter Sammy joins us. She's fresh off of fresh on a new job. They're at the Bellevue Public Library, and she started explaining all these cool things they do, technology and gadgets and stuff that's available. And I had no idea the public library was doing these things. So interesting conversation. You can check it out. It's already posted, homegadgetgeeks.com.
You can rent tons of movies there. You can rent, but it's a lot more than books.
Yeah.
And
cake pans.
Yeah.
Our library has cake pans you can check out. Yeah.
That's
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. But there's no more card catalog. That's gone.
No, it's all, in most cases, it's completely electronic now.
Back in the day. On the School of Podcasting, it is going to be, and this is fun. It's talking about being goofy. There's definitely goofiness coming on because the people I was talking to were goofy. And it is talking about launching a podcast, but through with insights from people like Jordan Harbinger, Joe Salsi High, Kristen Meisner, and just things like, one of the ones that people do when launching a show or to make a good show is crowd interaction. A la Ask the Podcast Coach. Always helpful to get your audience involved. So that is coming out on Monday. AskThePodcastCoach.com/live. Be sure to like and subscribe. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a good weekend.